Hello friends, I am Prashanth. I welcome you to Educational Stuff. Today we'll be discussing the Hindu Editorial Analysis. There are 4 articles which are published in editorial page. Today is 29th May 2020. One of the article which focuses on India-Nepal relations and another regarding India and China border dispute, and rest of the 2 articles which focus on export blocks, and the other which is regarding the Twitter handle a brewing storm to call out Trump. And in op-ed page we will be discussing one of the article, in India world force have the safe return to business. This is a picture exactly replica of what's happening in the scenario, as India and China are having a border dispute issue. Trump has tweeted that I can help them, but India is unwantedly not accepting his request. Let's get started. This is the first article which deals on export blocks. Official trade data for April released at the midpoint of Finance Ministry 5 tranche package to salvage the economy in the throes of pandemic-induced lockdown was the grimmest in the over 2 decades. Merchandise exports have collapsed over 60% and imports contracted only slightly less. Only the 2 of the India's 30 biggest export products clocked positive growth, that's iron ore and pharmaceuticals. Thanks to the sharp dip in global oil prices, higher volume of petroleum exports did not help much in value terms. The government's economic stimulus package in totality offered several reform commitments, improvements in the ease of doing business along with some forbearance and few SOPs for micro, small and medium enterprises. However, there was no explicit respite offered for exporters. The Reserve Bank of India on May 22nd did unveil a few measures, including a special of 15,000 crore liquidity facility for the Exim Bank of India and a 6-month extension for importers to complete outward remittances. For exporters, the maximum permissible credit is from 12 months to 15 months extended. The 3 months credit extension for exporter was in fact now a new measure and had already been announced by Central Bank on March 23rd. So it's repacking 2 months later. A fresh move suggests policymakers are running short of ideas to prop up a key employment generating bulkware of country's economy post-liberalization. In an employment incentive sector such as textiles, garment exports, which fell 16% between January to March, fell 19% in April. The outcome for May is unlikely to be any better, and the World Trade Organization expects trade follow to slip between 13% and 32% over 2020. The prognosis get even murkier when one adds to this new barriers on the trade in medical and food supplies imposed by 90 countries. The country is again pitching to become an alternative investment destination for big global businesses in the hope of COVID-19 pandemic would promote or prompt them to hedge their China-dependent supply chains. Meanwhile, Indian exporters shouldn't be caught on the back foot as the biggest stimulus package and announced by other countries kick in to revive demand and give a minor flip in the international trade. India must not miss out the rise in the world trade to back the stimulus package. The next article, which focuses on India and Nepal border dispute. This has already been discussed exclusively. If you want more details, just see on the eye icon, as you can just have a glance on that video to have an insight of this dispute. Once again, relations between India and Nepal have taken a turn for worse. The immediate provocation is a long-standing territorial issue surrounding Kalapani, a patch of land near the India-Nepal border, close to Lipu Lake Pass on the India-China border, which is one of the approved points for the border trade and a route to Kailash Mansarovar Yatra in Tibet. However, the underlying reasons are far more complex Yet, Nepal Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli's explosion of matter by raising the banner of Nepali nationalism and painting India as a hegemon is a part of frequent pattern that India indicates that relation between the two countries needs a fundamental reset. This is regarding the Kalapani and the maps. This is, as you can see from the extended portion there, that is Nepal's new edition. By April 2020, Mr. Oli's domestic political situation was weakening. Under Nepal's constitution, a new Prime Minister enjoys a guaranteed 2-year period during which no confidence motion is not permitted. This ended February, unleashing simmering resentment against Mr. Oli's governance style and performance. His inept handling of COVID-19 pandemic added to the growing disenhancement. The re-eruption of Kalapani controversy when the Defence Minister Rajnath Singh did a virtual inauguration of 80-kilometer road on May 8 provided Mr. Oli with a political lifeline. A subsequent comment by Chief of Army General Manoj Nirwane on May 15, that Nepal may have raised the issue at the behest of someone else, was insensitive, given that India COAS is also an honorary general of a Nepal army and vice versa, highlighting the traditional ties between the two armies. Mr. Oli has won the election in 2017 by flaunting his Nepalese nationalism card, the flip side of which is anti-Indianism. This is not a phenomenon but had become more pronounced in the recent years. Mr. Oli donated nationalist mantle vowing to restore Nepali territory and marked a new law in an anti-Indian rhetoric by taking about the virus being more lethal than Chinese or the Italian virus. A new map of Nepal based and the older British survey reflecting Kali River originating from Limpuyadra in north and west of was adopted by the Parliament and notified on May 20. On May 22nd, a constitutional amendment proposal was tabulated to include a relevant schedule. The new alignment adds 335 square kilometers to Nepali territory, the territory that has never been reflected in the Nepali map for nearly 170 years. This brief account illustrates the complexity underlying India-Nepal issue that cannot be solved by rhetoric or unilateral map-making exercises. Such brinkmanship only breeds mistrust and erodes the goodwill at the people-to-people level. Political maturity is needed to find creative solutions that can be mutually accepted. Meanwhile, Modi had often spoken on the neighborhood first policy. He started with a highly successful visit to Nepal in August 2014, but the relationship took a nosedive in 2015 when India first got blamed for interfering in the constitution drafting in Nepal and then for an unofficial blockade. The generated widespread resentment against the country. They reinforced to the notion that Nepali nationalism and anti-Indianism were the two sides of the same coin of Mr. Oli exploited successfully. In Nepal thinking, the China has provided them a leverage to practice their version of non-alignment. In the past, China maintained a link with the palace, and its concerns were primarily related to keeping tabs and Tibetan Refuge Committee. With the abolition of monarchy, China had shifted attention to political parties as also to institutions like army and armed police forces. The reality is that India has ignored the changing political narrative in Nepal for far too long. India remained content that the interests were safeguarded by quiet diplomacy, even when Nepali leader publicly adopted anti-Indian postures, an approach adopted decades earlier during the monarchy and then followed the political parties as a means of demonstrating nationalist credentials. Long ignored by India, it has spawned distortions in Nepali history textbook and led to long-term negative consequences. Today, this term carries a negative connotation that of the paternalistic India that is often insensitive and worse still, a bully. It is hardly surprising that 1950 Treaty of Peace and Friendship, which was sought by Nepali authority in 1949 to continue the special link it had with the British India and provides an open border and right to work for Nepalese nationalism, is viewed as a sign of unequal relationship and an Indian imposition. Yet Nepali authorities have studiously avoided taking it up bilaterally, even though the Nepal leaders thunder against it in their domestic rhetoric. The urgent need today is a pause the rhetoric on a territorial nationalism and lay the groundwork for a quiet dialogue where both sides need to display sensitivity as they explore the terms of the reset of the special relationship. This is regarding the urgent need today to pause the rhetoric on territorial nationalism and lay the groundwork for a quiet dialogue. A brewing storm. As political ironies go up, US President Donald Trump's tirade against social media platforms is a class apart. After Twitter flagged two of his posts as factually inaccurate, the President threatened to strongly regulate or close down all social media platforms. Like most of his statements, this is on the top appeared on Twitter when he has 80.4 million followers. When Mr. Trump entered the race for Republican presidential nomination in 2015, critics scorned him as a mere inconsequential Twitter handle for his acribic posturing on the platform. But outrage is richly rewarded on digital platforms as he went to Twitter too was a beneficiary in this process. The crafty use of social media for incendiary politics the world over scrapped the shine of these decentralized and unregulated platforms that was initially hailed as prodigiously democratic. The current conflict between president and social media platform is only a component of the ongoing wider debate in US on the nature of large tech companies. Big tech companies such as Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Apple have given rise to the concerns of privacy, data misuse, political bias, monopoly behavior, tax avoidance, and national security. In the US, there is a common ground among the Democrats and Republicans that these tech companies need to be reined in. Democrats believe some of these platforms are easily manipulated by enemies of nation and accuse them to unfair trade and labor practices and call for breaking them up. Facebook attempt to launch a digital currency, a Libra, has triggered sovereignty concerns among nations. It has to pay $5 billion in fines to settle investigations into the misuse of data in Cambridge Analytica controversy. These companies boast of being global and able to fly above the eyes of government. Some reordering of that arrangement appears to be on origin, but it would be a pity if the target or the trigger for the overhaul in the social media platform attempt to call out the irresponsible statements the world's most powerful leader. This is a Twitter did well to call out Trump, but fake news in an ecosystem is by itself. This is an article regarding India and China border dispute. India construction of road at Daulat Beg Oldi in Galwan Valley has been suggested as one of the reasons for the recent standoff between India and China along the line of actual control. China has said India was attempting to unilaterally change the status quo on the line of actual control. The Durbuk-Shiok DBO road was under construction for more than 15 years. As per protocol, local commanders kept informing each other about the construction activities. China never raised any objection against it. In fact, construction work on China's side of LAC have been much higher scale. It appears that current activities by China are meant to put pressure on India and are not based on any pursued transgressions by Indian troops. China has a history of changing lines. In late 1950s, the line kept moving westwards and ultimately led to 1962 war. More recently, in 2002, when the maps were exchanged during the expert group meetings, China showed a line in the western sector which was different from the existed on the ground since 1962. Again in 2007, China's perception of the border in Depsang in Ladakh sector in Sikkim and many other places appeared to change. In 2017, China wanted to unilaterally change the boundary and the tri-junction with Bhutan and India, which sparked a Doklam standoff. Until 2006, Chinese troops were positioned a few kilometers behind the LAC, except for a few places where they were deployed eyeball to eyeball with Indian troops. From 2007 onwards, we have seen a surge in defense infrastructure development along the LAC. At many locations, troops have been moved forward areas. At the same time, bilateral military relations have improved with annual defense dialogues and joint training. Patrol face-offs have been resolved with existing protocols and issue resolved at the local commanders level. After 1986 to 1987 Sumdorang Chu incident, it was only more than 30 years later at Doklam the Chinese transgression led to both sides moving up a brigade seized force around 5,000 troops to LAC. The border peace and tranquility agreement of 1993 have helped limit the number of troops deployed near the LAC by both sides and necessitate a mutual appraisal of any change in the numbers. In Ladakh, both sides, according to the reports, moved up at least a brigade seized force. Problems with the hotline, such disputes to be peacefully resolved and was done at Sumodorang Chu and Doklam. As a rule, cases of violation are resolved through a meeting of local commanders which may be arranged through conversation on hotlines established for that purpose. This arrangement had not been without problems. When the transgression is initiated by China, often the Chinese side does not answer the call on the hotlines as may have happened in this case. During the 2013 standoff at Deepsang, on 2014 incident at Chumar, which took place when the President Xi Jinping was visiting India, the local Chinese commander did not pick up the hotline. It took several days to resolve the crisis, leaving some to ask if President Xi's hold on the People's Liberation Army was not as strong as it to be assumed. Now the situation is different. Named the Hexin or a crore, Mr. Xi has assumed total control. It will be likely that Mr. Xi will go against the spirit of Wuhan and Mamalapuram, in which he had been personally invested. The standoff in Ladakh is likely to be resolved peacefully given the conventional strength of both sides. Any skirmish will lead to a stalemate. China will not gain anything. On the contrary, it has to lose much. China is aware that it cannot push India to this strategic alliance with US, which will tilt the balance power against Beijing. The current crisis may, however, have at least one last impact. We may see increased permanent deployments by both sides along the LAC and further erosion of trust in the agreements on both sides have to be built. This is regarding India and China's land dispute. While the flare-up in Ladakh is likely to be resolved peacefully, there may be an increased deployment again across the line of actual control. Can India's workforce have a safe return to business? The goal should be to flatten the mortality curve while allowing normal activities to resume. As the lockdown phase comes to close, can workers return to their jobs safely? The idea is to restart normal life, but at the same time mitigate the problems to epidemic. There are some things that people have not understood. One of that is this epidemic cannot be prevented. It will happen as transmitted during ordinary social contact. What we can do is slow down the spread. People talk about flattening the curve, even that for a country like India with multiple epidemics all started at a different time period asynchronously can only work in some places at some time, not all places at all time. Our goal should actually be flatten the mortality curve, reduce the deaths as far as possible. To expose the workers safely, we knew that the downturn was very obvious, but epidemic was not slowed down perceptibly. Between March 25 and April 15, the numbers grew 20. That was the time when we had to go back to the war room and change our strategy. The imperative of the lockdown was unorganized sector should have been provided with the food allowed to migrate. Those left behind should be in school buildings, tents and etc. should have been left behind. Unorganized businesses should have been supported with working capital. This is what called a survival package.